and then later on?
Yeah, I started recording. You can share your screen.
Okay, okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. So I think I hope my screen is visible.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, great. All right. Today we'll be just covering a very it's not a very difficult topic to understand or a very difficult topic to go by. So we're looking at the idea of tenders. Yeah. And you have heard, sure you heard this word before about tenders, and tenders are basically, they are kind of these calls for service. Okay. Which means that if I want a particular service from a particular whatever whoever supplier, okay, the way in which I can reach those suppliers is that I float certain tenders. And obviously, as architects, we require tenders for various services. That includes material suppliers, contractors. There might be consultants. All right. So and the way in which we reach these people is through the process of tendering, and the responsibility of floating a tender often lies with the architect. And today, nowadays, it's often the standard practice for especially the government firms to kind of look at tenders as to first assign a PMC, okay, a project management consultant, who will then raise tenders for different kinds of different kind of specialists or something like that. Okay. So that is basically how we go about understanding the further idea of tenders, and we'll look at what the tender consists of and all, and what the architect's role is in that. So, like I said, what is a tender? A tendering is simply a process of making an offer, a bid, or a proposal, or expressing interest in response to an invitation or request for tender. So it's simple, right? I send out a request for a tender, and the tenderer, that is the person who is going to respond to that, is going to make an offer, and I'm going to choose the best offer. Organizations will seek out other businesses to respond to a particular need, like I just said, such as the supply of goods and services, and will select the offer or tender that best meets their needs and provides the best value for money. So again, tendering is a process wherein you get a lot of offers, you select the best one, and what suits you best is obviously something that is up to you, and that's how the process works. So this is basically how a tender process works. You can look at these as sort of bullet points, or a basic kind of benchmarks or landmarks of the tendering process. So first, obviously, you determine the tender process. Okay. Now what happens in this stage is that the client and the consultant, or the architect in this case, would sit together. They would try to look at the project from various perspectives. They try to understand what is the best process by which tenders can be floated. And as we can see, as we'll see in future, or not in future, I shouldn't, we'll see in this presentation, is that there are many different processes of tendering. So then we prepare a request for tender, and you might have seen these in your newspapers and whatnot. You see call for tenders and things like that. So that is basically prepared. Then tenders are invited. That means that through various means, these tender requests are floated, meaning that they're either published in newspapers, or they're published in journals, or they might be put on the internet, whatever it is. Yeah. And then the suppliers would respond to it, and in the tender notice itself, you'll see that there are the ways in which suppliers can respond. There might be a website, there might be an address or a phone number, whatever it is, an email address, where the suppliers can respond in a particular format, and we'll look at the format as well. Okay. Then comes evaluation and selections. You have a lot of tenders that or tender bids that come in, and you will evaluate all the bids, and you would select a certain number of bids. Then notification means that you notify the person or persons whose bids have been selected, and then you debrief them, meaning that you basically call them up for a meeting, and then you discuss the project more in detail. And ultimately, you establish contracts, and you manage the contracts. Okay, because ultimately that's what the process is leading towards, that there will be contracts signed between various parties, especially like in the case of so what is the architect's role? For example, architect would be the kind of the intermediary in this case. The contract will be signed between the contractor, like, which could be the consultant or a supplier or whatever, and the client. So and the architect would basically advise the client on the right kind of contract, and how it is supposed to be managed. Okay, so these are different types of tenders that are floated. So we can see, and they are pretty self-explanatory. We can see here. So the first type we'll call it as open tendering, and it's a process is an invitation to tender by public advertisement. Okay, there is no restriction on placed on who can submit a tender. However, suppliers are required to submit all required information and are evaluated against the selected criteria. So here it's completely open. Anybody, literally anybody, can apply to the tender or to the tender process. Yeah, there is no, like, you might have seen in some cases there are certain entry parameters. Here there is no such thing. Anybody can respond, but obviously you would have to give your information about what kind of a practice you have, or what kind of a firm you are, what is the turnover, etc., etc., and then the person would evaluate that against their own needs. The second is select tendering, where it's only open to select number of suppliers. These two can actually work as a two-stage sort of tendering process, where the first open tender is used to kind of shortlist a certain number of bidders, and then the second stage is only done with these select number of people, as we can see. And that's exactly what we are seeing here in the multi-stage tendering, okay, which is the next type of tendering, wherein a multi-stage tender is used when there are a large number of respondents. At each stage in the process, the suppliers are culled to those who are most suited. So you would have different layers in which you would have first suppliers who only, for example, maybe belong to a certain a certain specialization. Then you might have the second round where they're looking at only a certain size of firm, things like that. So in that way, you slowly kind of whittle down the large list of respondents to a very small number of possible finalists. The last is the next one is called invited tendering, wherein wherein you actually select a number of suppliers directly. Okay, so you send them a special request for a tender. So you don't really look at a large number of people, or don't really look at the open market to give. You already have a list of people who you already have in mind, and then they would probably be invited separately. So this is different from select tendering, because in select tendering you don't have a list of people who are there. You are basically creating a criteria, and whoever fits the criteria can then apply for a tender. Whereas here you have an actual list of people who you will be calling for response to the bid. So it's not going to be an open bid. It will be it will basically be a closed bid, for a very specific group of people. Yeah. So and we can see here how is tender invited. There are three ways in which tenders can be called for. One is private invitation, that is select or limited invitation. So as we saw before, if you have an invited tendering process, you would go for this kind of a private invitation. Yeah. The second is public notice, as what we see in the newspapers and all. Okay. And third is negotiation. So we'll look at what they are. So we can see here private invitation is basically when the architect or engineer maintain a panel of contractors and call some of them to quote for a certain particular job. And you will notice that these kind of invitations are done mostly for private works. Okay, government jobs generally don't go for private tenders. Okay, specifically because you may have a certain, obviously there are empaneled people, but even the empanelment happens or based on certain criteria. Private invitation would be wherein where the project is being funded by a private body, so there is no real sort of accountability for it. Where you have to ask for a larger group of people or something like that. So anybody can, so they can basically make their own sort of decisions. Whereas if you look at a private work, if you look at a public work, then obviously they are answerable to all different kinds of bodies, and therefore they have to be very, very transparent. So they don't generally go for private invitations for tenders. The second, as we said, public notice. So it completely opens the field for new contractors, and new architects and engineers can come in contact with the with them. So suppose you are a new entrant in the field, and you are a new kind of you have just opened up a new firm, then open public notice kind of tenders are the way to go, because there are no restrictions here based on what kind of there are no restrictions based on what kind of firm you are. Of course, there are some restrictions, but as long as you follow those minimum restrictions, anybody can potentially get that particular job. And ultimately, our negotiations. So what this means is, this is similar to what we talk about here in the select tendering process, wherein the architect or the engineer, sorry, they have some datum for negotiations. So they have a certain baseline, okay, a certain minimum requirement, such as the maximum rate of cost for a particular job. So suppose you have, say, okay, I have a job and it must be done, on a maximum at this cost, and you cannot go beyond that particular price. So with that datum, you hold negotiations with different contractors, and then work is assigned to the right one. And so if you have a small job, probably something that would not, something like a repair job, okay, and you have a schedule of rates with you already, you know exactly what is supposed to be done, then you would probably go for such kind of a process, because again, the tendering process would take time, and it wouldn't make sense for a small job and a job that could be done in maybe a week or 2 weeks to to take a tendering process that may take months. So that doesn't so in that case you would go for this kind of a negotiated tender kind of a contract. Okay. So there are different natures of tenders, and these are just some 8 to 9 of them. And the nature of tender actually is based on the nature of the contract that will be assigned at the end of the tendering process. Okay, so we can see here what they are. There's the item rate tender, the schedule of rates with percentage up or down, lump sum, and we'll go through all of these one by one. The first one, the item rate tender, is generally the most common one. Okay, and it is an offer to execute work based on the rates of different items of work. So what will this contain? It will contain a BOQ. Okay, you already know how to make a BOQ, right? So it would contain a bill of quantities, and of course there would be approximate quantities, not perfect quantities, because obviously no, you cannot have exact quantities unless the work actually begins, and they are not binding on the owner. So you have a bill of quantities, and the rate column is left empty. Okay, and the contractor does is they simply fill in those rates in that bill of quantities. The BOQ is provided to them, and the contractor is paid on the measurement of work executed at the rates quoted in the tender. Okay, meaning that suppose you say that you have a job wherein there is some excavation involved, and the excavation is say whatever 3,000 cubic meters, right? And at the end of the day, there might be some differences that have, there's some changes that happen in the design or whatever it is, and the job goes up to 3,500 square cubic meters of excavation. In that case, the contractor is paid on the rate that they have quoted. So if they will quote the rate of, say, whatever 50 or 20 30 rupees per cubic meter for excavation, they'll be paid for 30 into 3,500. Because the rates are form of the contract, are part of the contract, but the quantities are not. So like I said, here it's approximate and not binding on the owner. So tomorrow the owner might say, oh, I know I have to excavate more, or whatever, I require more material, whatever it is. The contractor will have to simply provide more material, but of course they will get paid for it, but at the rate that they have quoted. They cannot say that, oh, if you need to have more material or less material, for example, then you will have to give me at a bigger rate. And this happens more often than you might think. That you have a certain job, and you ultimately turns out that, oh, you don't require as much material as as was initially thought. And the contractor might say, but oh, then that would eat into my profit margin or something. And so, because if you have to buy smaller quantities, that generally goes at a at a greater rate. So but then that doesn't happen when you have item rate tender, because the rates that have been filled in are binding, they are part of the contract. It is not risky for the contractor, hence quality of workmanship is assured. Meaning what? That tomorrow the contractor, the contractor doesn't have any sort of this thing. Tomorrow if the quantities increase or decrease, doesn't matter, because the rates have already been fixed. So it doesn't really make any difference, and you have the freedom to make reasonable variations in the plans or the designs, I should say. Okay, so because again we are talking about not lump sum amounts, but you're talking about rates. So even if the design changes here or there, it doesn't really matter. So it gives you that kind of freedom in that particular case. Okay, the next is kind of a schedule of rates with percentage up or down. So this is also called as the basic rates with rise and fall clauses. Okay, so it's like an item rate tender only. But what is done in this particular case is that there is the same kind of a BOQ that is there. Okay, but the prices are already filled in. Okay, so this is done when you kind of actually know the kind of rates or the kind of prices that might happen. So you fill in the prices as well. Okay, as like you said over here, we are asked to fill in the rates, but here the prices are given. Okay, and what the tender is asked is how much above or below that price they can go. So if you say, oh, I need to, buy whatever, I need to buy tiling or whatever, nano white tiles at 450 rupees per square foot, then that would be written in my tender, and the contractor would say, can you go below or above this? So the contractor might say, okay, I need to, I can procure you the nano white at 400 maybe, or 425, jo bhi hai. Yeah. And then that is basically how you would try to kind of go with this kind of this kind of a tender. And it's done for suitably for repair, like I said, small jobs, new build, maintenance works, things like that. Okay, so and especially done when when there are going to be rates or things that you are aware of, know how much the going sort of the range of rates in the market is. So and you have your certain benchmark for it. The next is the lump sum tender. So again, it's pretty simple in the terms that you have a set of drawings and specifications. All right, you give it to the contractor. The contractor straight away quotes a lump sum price. Okay, whatever it might be. So the contractor will provide all the materials and the labor that is for a fixed lump sum or a fixed rate per cubic or square meter of work. So for example, they might say, okay, you have a whatever, you have a house that I want to do for the interiors. For interiors might not actually do the tendering process, but just for hypothetically, suppose you are doing the interiors of a house, you do a tendering process, then the contractor might say that, okay, the house is whatever 2000 square feet, and I will charge you say whatever 1500 rupees per square feet for interiors, and then that would be the lump sum. Now in that there is no there's no kind of division of rates. There's a lump sum amount, you have drawings and you have specifications, and they go with that. So the contractor may specify that the fees are to be paid in installments or at the end of the job. So you may have that kind of a thing that pay at every week or every every stage of work or whatever it is. That is called as a lump sum tender. And obviously there are problems in this, like for example, if you change designs or you change specifications, then the lump sum might change, and then the contractor is at a certain amount of risk in those terms. So mostly it's done for, like I said, very small kind of works where there is not much scope of variations. So you have to see that when you have lump sum tender, the responsibility of making those very precise drawings and specifications lies with the architect. Okay, because you have a lump sum kind of a tender, you need to be very clear exactly what each and every job is supposed to entail, and how much material and how much how much labor it would require. The time for completion has to be specified. You cannot say that to a contractor that you can just go on working for whatever number of months. You have to have a very specific time for completion. Okay, unless specifically mentioned otherwise, it is assumed that the contractor will be affected part payments as mutually agreed. So like we said before, if you may have a contract where it's specified that the fees are to be paid in installments or at the end of the job, but if it's not specified, then it's assumed by default that there will be timely payments, as per whatever, as per mutually agreed times, where whatever per week or whatever it is, the contract amount is not decided on basis of measurements except for additions and omissions. So again, the contractor would make their own calculations and they would give you a lump sum. Beyond that, it has got nothing to do with the designs unless you make some changes to it. Yes, that becomes a very messy process. Yeah. Okay. At times, the contractor may be asked to submit a priced bill of quantities, which will not form part of the contract. Okay, the owner is not entitled to deduct any amount from the lump sum contract on the basis that the quantities worked out are less, even in the case of calculation errors. Extremely important. Okay, in an item rate tender, all right, each and every rate is part of the contract. Okay, if you reduce the quantities or you increase the quantities or whatever, you change the quality of in the specifications, then those items rate then those rates would change. Okay, whereas here, for a lump sum, even for lump sum tender, lump sum contract, you might have some person, on an almost an informal basis, the contractor may give you a certain list of works. Okay, wherein they might say, okay, this is the work and this is the rate for it or whatever it is. Okay, but tomorrow if you say, but oh, I thought that my kitchen would be whatever 80 square feet, but it turns out to be 75 square feet, then the contractor is under no obligation to reduce those costs. Okay, if they say that it's going to cost you whatever 3 lakh rupees, it's going to cost you 3 lakh rupees no matter what. Okay. But again, because these are done for small projects where there is very little scope of but deviation, it doesn't really matter. Okay. Then you have something called as a lump sum plus percentage tender. So again, it's really nothing different from a lump sum tender, except there is an incentive wherein if the contractor finishes the work before a specified deadline, they are granted a certain percentage of the cost. Okay. So or if it is done at under a certain amount also, then there is a kind of an incentive clause added to the this thing. So if the price is whatever 20 lakhs and the contractor finishes before time, then they might get another additional 2 lakhs or whatever it is. So there is an incentive for the contractor to finish the job quicker. Then there is something called as a cost plus percentage tender. Sorry. So here, what happens is that the expenditure incurred by the contractor is paid by the owner in addition to a certain percentage of the cost as profit for the professional services. So what happens here is again, it's a question of the contractor. It's a little bit risky for the contractor, because here the contractor is actually paying upfront the costs of the work, and then those costs will be reimbursed by the client or by the whoever the owner is. Okay. And the owner will also then pay some amount of profit on top of that. Okay. So at times such contracts or tenders, I should say, are only invited from a few contractors, asking them to name the price at which so like a lump sum and the fees that they expect. The fees are usually fixed at a certain percentage of the cost of work. So again, they would be asked to know how much would be the cost to them, and then they would add another 5% or 10%, whatever it might be, as per their profit. So that is basically the cost plus percentage format of the tender. Again, you can see that these are nothing but different forms of lump sum tenders. Okay. And then there is a cost plus fixed fee. So it's a modified form of cost plus percentage, where you don't talk about a percentage, you talk about a fixed amount above the cost of the project. Okay. So irrespective of the cost. So what happens in this case is that the cost of the materials and labor are directly paid by the owner. Okay. And so the contractor's financial liability becomes nil. Yeah. So what happens is, suppose if you if you are able to finish the work at a lower cost than than what was initially projected. All right. It doesn't mean that you would get paid a less amount, because here, if you see cost plus percentage, you would the percentage of the amount, since it's whatever 10%, if you finish at a lower kind of cost, your fees would become less for the contractor. But here that's not the case. In fact, it's an incentive for the contractor to finish at a lower at a lower cost, because in that case you would it doesn't affect the fees that you're getting paid. Okay. Not you, I mean the contractor is getting paid. Yeah. And so the fees is paid in 4 to 5 installments, the last one to be paid after the work is finished. So again, that's a pretty standard kind of a clause in any contract, and we'll talk about that more when we talk about contracts in a future class. Okay. All right. And then again, there is the next one with cost plus fixed fee with bonus and penalty. Again, in order to keep a check on the cost of the project, this contract is slightly modified. So again, we can see there is another kind of a feature of the lump sum, wherein if the cost of the project remains the same as estimated in advance, then the contractor receives his agreed fees with no profit or penalty. Simple enough. But if the cost turns out to be less than estimated, then the contractor becomes eligible for a percentage of the profit capped at 50% of the agreed fees. So if your if your fees is supposed to be, I don't know, if your fees is supposed to, if the cost of the project is 20 lakhs, you have a fixed fee of 3 lakhs maybe. Okay. Then if the work is finished, if the work turns out to be less than 20 lakhs, whatever it is, suppose it gets finished at 18 lakhs, then out of the 18, you might, out of the saved 2 lakhs that is on top, you might get some amount, the contractor might get some amount of that as a bonus. Similarly, if it turns out to be more, then the contractor would be liable to get their fees slashed up to a certain amount, based on how much more it went beyond budget. Basically, the project went beyond budget, so it kind of keeps a check on the cost of the project also. Okay. And obviously there are caps at that, so you cannot get more than 50% of the agreed fees as an incentive. So if your fees is 3 lakhs, you cannot get more than 1 lakh 1.5 lakhs as an incentive or bonus. and if your fees is 3 lakhs, you cannot get more than you cannot it cannot be slashed as more than 2 lakh rupees from the agreed upon fees. Okay, and then the second last thing actually we'll talk about is a labor tender. So here the contractor agrees to carry out the complete labor work of the items of work at rates quoted. Okay, the contractor has to supply all the tools, plants meaning by plant I mean that suppose you have to create suppose you have to you have to make concrete on the site, then the concrete making plant has to be created, or if you are going to make like a lime plaster, then lime plaster plant has to be created, that kind of plant. Okay, then other things like scaffolding, centering, nails, squares, etc. And whatever, and the owner supplies only the materials, so bricks, cement, whatever it is, all these materials are tiles, all these are supplied by the owner. The owner has to keep a close watch over the materials used, as their wastage is not a concern of the contractor. Again, this is done specifically when the owner has a stake in maybe the owner has certain kind of a pipeline for materials, or they have a very specific idea of what materials they want to use. Then they would kind of go for this kind of a contract. So they would have their own materials, and the contract will only be for the labor. Now tenders are sometimes invited on the basis of per square meter or per cubic meter of construction. So the contractor would basically just look at the amount, the work in terms of its its area or volume, and then simply quote a rate. All right, for the labor, obviously not for the materials, the labor and the tools, etc. Okay, and the payment for extra work are restricted to the labor costs only. So again, if there are any extra works to be done, only the extra labor that is to be paid for, only that the contractor will get paid for. Okay, not the materials or anything else. And finally, we have what is called as a demolition tender. Okay, this is actually like a negative tender basically, because whereas you look at other tenders as what is the lowest cost to the owner, here we look at how much can the contractor pay the owner back. Okay, the reason being that the contractor takes away the materials in the old buildings and pays the owner a specified amount in return. Okay, so there are different things, like for example, if you're demolishing an old structure, there are timber doors and door frames and maybe whatever flooring members and all these kind of things, which can be salvaged and they can be sold back again somewhere. So what happens in this case is that the contractor would basically kind of take this as a kind of a almost like they would buy the house from you pretty much. Okay, they would demolish the house and they would take away all the all the salvage materials, and they would pay you for it. Okay, they almost like a raddiwala, nothing pretty much that's what it boils down to. Okay, so the highest bidder is awarded the contract. So whoever pays me the highest amount for the materials, that person will get the this thing. The tender should be accommodated with a deposit amount, as the contractors are reluctant to do the removal work of plinth due to the higher amount of work against the lower amount of salvageable material. Also, they are careless in carting away the debris. So again, the contractor has to pay a deposit beforehand, before they even start to demolish the house or the building. Okay, and that is specifically done to keep them honest. Because again, like what's written over here, the plinths take the highest amount of work, because you're literally to dig around them and kind of break them apart and then carry off the debris, as opposed to the superstructure. Also, the carrying away debris which is not marketable is something that contractors tend to be a little bit careless about, and so therefore they have to pay a deposit beforehand, so that they have this kind of a thing that if they don't pay a deposit, their deposit might get whatever held back if they don't finish the job properly. The contractor must take out insurance against accidents and etc. is the contractor's responsibility. And all the other things, like for example, cutting off the water supply, cutting off the electric supply, drainage connections, etc., becomes the contractor's responsibility. So the contractor would basically kind of weigh the pros and cons. They would weigh the costs of demolition and all of these things, the insurance, etc., and they would kind of weigh that against the salvageable kind of things. Even debris, for example, still is something that can be sold off. They use debris are used for landfill and for for filling up plants and things like that. So when you're cutting filling off things like that, then that time debris also gets sold on the market. So even that actually becomes something that the contractor can resell, I should say. Yeah. Other modes of execution apart from tendering are called as day work, piecework, and daily labor. So again, these are done for smaller jobs. So adapted for small items of work that cannot be measured or valued. Okay. The payment made to contractor consists of net cost of material and labor plus 20 to 25% to cover the contractor's profit and other charges. Okay. And it requires a proper check on materials used and labor employed, and reports on the same countersigned by clerk of works is to be submitted by contractor on a weekly basis. Clerk of works is a person who is present on the site, okay, at all times, okay, and it's not a technical person. I don't believe, Mamta, have we talked about this before, Naina? We haven't.
No, it will come in under contracts, Shantanu, again.
Contracts, yeah. Okay, so just to give you a
Yeah.
very quick overview, this clerk of works is just a non-technical person, okay, and their job is very specific. If they're told, we are going to get 50 sacks of cement, they will count 50 sacks of cement. They will not do anything else. They will not make any changes to the designs. They will not solve anybody's doubts, nothing like that. They have a very specific kind of instruction given to them, and they will only follow that. And that is specifically why they are non-technical. They are not architects or engineers or anything like that. Yeah. So if they are told कि इतना काम है, हुआ होगा तो ही sign करने का और पैसा release करने का, they will do that. Then the contractor simply cannot argue with them कि नहीं ये ऐसा है वैसा है. Nothing like that will happen. Okay. So that's a day work kind of that kind of contract. This is the kind of sheet that gets filled up. Okay, so if you have so whatever the work is done, they have to fill up that sheet, and then that is countersigned by the clerk of works. This is the kind of sheet that we get. So you have obviously the common things like the name of the work, the name of the owner, name of architect. Why is this so slow? Okay. Then particulars of extra items, etc. And then you might have certain, very specific kind of things like how much cement was consumed, how much sand was consumed, how many, labor was employed, how much work was actually was actually finished in that particular, day or whatever it is. And then they are simply paid for that kind of work. So it's again like if you see over here, it's like one ceiling flower. When this is like some interior work, but they are daily worksheet. So it's really a very small job, really. Piecework is when work is of an urgent nature. Where day work is not possible. It is divided into parts, and each part is given to a contractor known as piecework. Okay, so the item and rates are agreed upon in advance. So for example, if you have a certain, like one example given here is you digging a canal, okay, or if you, to give another example, suppose you are digging a trench, or maybe you are cleaning up gutters, that kind of contracts are given by the municipality. All right. In that case, they don't give it to one contractor, they give it to several contractors, okay, and they simply give the contractor one part of that larger work. So for a specific length or time limit, they say, okay, this is your job, and the next person will do the next, whatever number of meters for, or whatever it is. Okay, so that is called as a piecework. And the last is daily labor. So it's suitable for maintenance work on roads, canals, etc. And the owner or government body employs all the labor necessary, whose attendance is recorded daily in the muster roll. The materials are obtained by the owner. The workers are paid daily, weekly, or monthly as previously agreed. So here it's simply labor. Okay, nothing. There is nobody else involved in this. You come to the site. I mean, not you, but the worker comes to the site. They work for a specified number of whatever hours, 8 hours, 10 hours, whatever it might be. Not 10 hours, but because labor law would not allow you to get somebody to work for 10 hours, but 8 hours or whatever it is. And then they would get paid at the specified rate. And they would either get paid all per day, or they would get paid per week based on how many weeks they came, all these kind of things. Okay. So for example, Manrega kind of, if you've heard of it, it's the National Rural Employment Guarantee, whatever act, the works under that are these kind of daily labor sort of works, so you go there, you dig a hole, and you get paid for it. So that's pretty much how that works. Again, it's for maintenance works, roads, canals, etc. These kind of things where you don't want to really go into, like, where a very complicated tendering process. Yeah. So that is basically how these smaller kind of work processes. Sorry, these are modes of execution of work. Go about. So now very quickly, I will talk about the earnest money aspect of it. So earnest money is basically the money that is deposited when the tenderer shows the seriousness of the bidder. Okay. So if I'm bidding for something, I also pay a certain amount of money along with my bid. Okay, and that's about 1 to 2% of the estimated cost of the project. Yeah, and so it's kept in custody of the architect and until the work is allotted to the particular bidder. And if you don't get the job as the contractor, then you get your earnest money back. Again, if the contractor refuses to enter into a contract after the tender has been accepted, then the earnest money is forfeited. Okay. This is specifically done so that so that a person can't. So like we said, in the open contracts, anybody can bid. Yeah. So if you bid and then then you get the contract and then you refuse to enter into the contract, or you get the tender and then you refuse to enter into the contract, then you are basically forfeiting your earnest money that you. So that earnest money pretty much covers the cost of of the tendering process. So because of your refusal to enter into a contract, the tender process will have to be done all over again. So that is basically what the earnest money. So earnest means sincere. So it shows the sincereness and the seriousness of the bidder in actually carrying the work to its to its finish. Then you have something called as security deposit. Okay, this is again what something that a contractor is supposed to deposit with the project or with the architect actually. And once the tender is accepted, the contractor is asked to deposit a further 2 to 5% of the project cost as a security deposit. Okay, this includes the money already deposited as the earnest money. So if you have already deposited 1 to 2%, the above whatever 3% or 4% that's remaining, that becomes your security deposit. And the total money along with the earnest deposit becomes your security deposit. And it is kept as an assurance that the contractor will fulfill all the terms and conditions of the contract. Again, these are basically things that keep both parties honest. Okay, and failure to do so may result in the forfeiture of all or part of the security deposit. So if at the end of the day the contractor does half a job and runs away, then the security deposit is forfeited. So you can use the security deposit to either finish the job, or you can use it to do the whole tendering process or whatever it is. And so it doesn't really become a burden on the owner or the client. Next is called as a retention amount. So these are all part of the contract. Okay, so we know that it is not always possible for the contractor to deposit the amount necessary all at once, as their business depends upon the rolling of capital. Okay, so it is agreed that the amount to be paid by the contractor by installments from the amount due after every stage of work. So what happens here is, suppose we say that the contractor the job is say the worth 50 crores. Yeah, and the contractor is supposed to pay a 2% security deposit. The 50 crores ka 2% is like 10 1. Yeah, it's like 10 crores, 10 lakhs, right? So if so a contractor might not have that much money to pay immediately. All right. So what happens in that case is, from every from every stage of payment, you cut 10%. So the first installment is supposed to be 1 CR. Then the contractor would possibly only get 90 lakhs, and the remaining 10 lakhs would be deposited back as the retention amount, and that is held back, and then it is paid at the end of the whole process. Okay. Now that was all coming from the contractor or contractor side. The contractor was paying money, in order, like depositing money to keep themselves, attached to the project. Now what comes next is something that is supposed to be given from the client to the contractor. Yeah, and that is called as the mobilization fund. Okay, now mobilization fund is why, because the liquidity of funds is required for the contractor to begin the work, right? You have to get, so the contractor would generally pay their labor in, like, in cash, to get them to the place of work, to have them build whatever temporary shelters, to pay advance amounts to material suppliers, things like that. So for all of that you require certain mobilization fund. Now generally that is limited to 10% of the total cost of the project. So you would pay that mobilization fund to the contractor. Okay. And it may be paid in one installment within 1 month of signing of the contract, or in 2 or 3 installments. Yeah. So it is recovered from each payment effected during the course of the project. So again, mobilization fund is not part of the fees. Okay, it is now you might feel that there's a lot of back and forth happening here. I mean, why is it that if I'm supposed to pay the contractor some money and I'm paying them 10% now, might as well let them keep it, no? But no. The thing is that, like we said, no, we are talking about this in terms of constantly keeping some amount of money back from each party. Okay, and so that they finish the job before they kind of move on from that particular project. So here what happens is, if I've paid a mobilization fund of whatever 10%, okay, from each installment of payment, that mobilization fund is recovered. Okay, so ultimately you get paid the full amount as the fees minus the and plus the whatever mobilization fund has been paid before, that is then that has already been deducted from the total fees that has been paid to you. Okay. So what do the tender documents include? You have done working drawings, you have done BOQs, yeah, in your third year. All of these, both of these documents form a part of the tender documents. Okay. So we can see here the first is the description of the goods and services to be procured. This will include what work will involve and any technical specifications or details relating to requirements, deliverables, or outcomes of the project. Okay. We have a certain, now you have obviously done working drawings, and I believe you have also done specifications. Yeah, there are general specifications and special specifications that are there. Okay, these actually form a part of the tender document. So then, so you know exactly what is to be done, how it is to be done, at what quality is to be done, etc. Okay. The conditions of tender are there. So all these terms and conditions we talk about, the security deposit, the earnest money, the retention amount, the mobilization fund, all of those form the conditions of the tender. Okay, and they must be met in order to be considered for the project or the contract. Okay, also there might be technical qualifications, experience, etc., licensing, whatever conditions, other legal or financial conditions, all of these things. So you may some people insist on using only unionized labor in their projects. So that might be a part of your this depends, like that would generally be a part of the government projects and things like that. Okay, so that would be the conditions of tender, which will be forming a part of the tender documents. Then there is the evaluation criteria. So this would tell you exactly on what basis the tenders would be evaluated. Okay, so that is again a part of the tender documents. Then submission content and format. So in what way are you supposed to fill out the tender? That is also given to you. So things like file formats, presentations, length of submission, templates might be provided, that you have to simply have to fill up the information in the form of a template. All of these are given as a form of a tender document. Then the process rules and information. So you can, these would include things like the deadline, where and when it should be submitted, what should be included in the submission. For example, pricing schedule, or information, the persons to contact for clarification or inquiries regarding the tender. Now, these might seem like very simple things, all right, but they are very important. Reason being that a person should not be able to claim that they have submitted the tender when they have not. Yeah. So if I write very, very specifically that a tender has to be submitted at so and so place at so and so time to so and so person. Okay. Only then the tender can be held to be considered to be submitted. Then so nobody can say, oh, I went and I gave it to the peon. Then that would basically be legal grounds for you to reject that tender or say that tender never made it. The conditions of contract. So what exactly would be a contract at the end of the process be? That is part of the tender document. So the person knows what kind of general standard terms and conditions of contract. This I think Mamta will cover in the future lecture. Okay, and with whatever additions or alterations. So all that becomes a part of the tender document. So the person who is entering the tendering process knows what kind of a contract they should be expecting. So this is a kind of a very old and very standard form of a tender notice. Okay, you might see you might see the similar tender notices in more or less similar. This is 1900. So this is like at least 20 years old. So you can see that they are more than 20. Bombay likha hai to 96 ke pehle ka hai. So 25 years old. So so you might see something like this, very similar to this, that has the kind of similar wording. Okay. And so as you can see here, it says sealed tenders are invited from contractors of repute for the construction of residential buildings. So name of project is given. Okay. Approximate cost is given. Last date for submission is given. Time is given. Okay. Tender forms can be had from the office of the undersigned on date so and so date on payment of tender fees, which is non-refundable. Copies of the drawings can be inspected at the office during office hours or can be had from the office on payment of rupees 200. This is now generally now not done nowadays, because nowadays you have soft copies and all of these things. But even so, even getting soft copies generally requires some amount of money to be paid, because you don't want people to just for the heck of it get drawings from you and use them for whatever else. So a person obviously will have to pay some kind of a deposit when they take these drawings with you. Also, they don't. Also, tenders can now generally be most often be uploaded online. So, but the sort of the principle remains the same. Okay. The tender must be accompanied by a earnest money of rupees 50,000. So here it's 2%. Okay. An architect or the owner is not bound to accept the lowest tender or any tender or assign any reason for the same. This is very, very important. Okay. The last line, because if you reject a tender, it doesn't mean that you are answerable to the tenderer as to why their tender was rejected. Okay. Obviously there are certain guidelines and all these kind of things, but again, it's up to the it's a job. Okay. It's not something that is that you're entitled to. So the owner or the architect can pretty much take choose any tender that they like, without even if it is not the lowest tender or whatever it is. Okay. And they don't need to explain that to anybody else, like especially not the other tenderers or whatever. And you can see here it's signed by the architect, engineer and surveyors, that is the consultants over here. Okay. So it's not signed, it's not floated by the for whatever Purnima Cooperative Society. It is floated by the architects or by the, in this case it might be the project consultants. So it is their job to kind of float a tender on behalf of these clients that they have. Special tender notice again pretty much would be similar. So here you can so here it's basically given to a certain, if you can see here, it's addressed to a specific person. Yeah. And so this would be what you call as an invited tender. Okay. Again, it doesn't have much of a difference in terms of its content. It tells you the same, pretty much the same thing. Okay. It tells you the date and the time and all these kind of all these kind of specific conditions. Yeah. It talks about the earnest money deposit, all of these things. The only difference really is that it is addressed to a specific person, whereas this one is not addressed to anyone specific. It's an open tender. Yeah. Okay, I'll just run through this very, very quickly. So how is tender assessed? Okay, you have the first initial assessment. So very, very basic kind of assessment. If it has complied with all the requirements, if it has all the documents, all the signs have been done, blah, 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 these kind of things. Okay. The second is complies with any conditions of participation. So whether it has been lodged on time, whether all the documents are signed, whether tender meets all mandatory requirements, all of these things. The selection criteria for a tender may be include the technical merit of the proposal. Okay, that is the if the contractor has the relevant skills to carry forward the project. And ultimately you might get at the end of the day the person who gets the tender, or basically whose tender has been selected, might get a work order letter like this, that basically says that with reference to your item rate tender for the above work, we have been directed by our client to inform you that it has been accepted and your appointment is hereby confirmed. We shall be thankful to you if you will kindly commence the work after signing the contract. Now you understand this. Okay. At this stage, the contract has not been signed. It's an offer letter. Okay. It's that like you have asked for a bid, you have put in a bid, the bid has been accepted. Okay. After this, the contractor will have to still go and sign the contract. There might be other negotiations based on that, and only then the work will actually commence. Yep. Okay. That's I think pretty much all. Let me just. Yeah. So that is pretty much all there is to it about the tenders, and this. So again, it's a process which in which the architect is involved in terms of their in as a consultant, or as a as what you can say, as a main contact of the client towards the contractor. So things like drafting the contract, the tender documents, or making the sets of drawings that would be presented to the bidders, making the BOQs, making the writing down the specifications, drawing up the working drawings, sets, all of these jobs that includes the details, that includes maybe service drawings or whatever it is, all of these would be the job of the architect, or the consultant. That is our role in this particular case. Yeah, and that's why we need to be aware of what is this process and how exactly it is supposed to be carried out. Yeah. Okay. Mamta, you want to add something?
No, just like a general this thing about tenders itself. It's very important in the way that that tender notice gets drafted. Okay, so if you check the newspaper, even an e-newspaper or whatever it is, you should familiarize yourself with the way that they get drafted for the different kinds of projects, right? So we're not looking at just a reconstruction of a building or just designing of a bungalow. We are even looking at very complex tenders for, say, large institutions, your infrastructure projects, and the like. So you should be going through these things in general, so that you're aware of how they get drafted, what are the kind of specific requirements that are being asked for, right? So if you're looking for, maybe if you want to design a hospital, you probably would have a specially invited tender where you send it out to firms who already have that kind of experience. There are also urban level projects. So these are the things which it would be nice if you could take some time out and go through these kind of tenders. Also, like Shantanu mentioned, you have done the bill of quantities, so you are aware of all that. But when you have that BOQ in front of you, that is when the whole thing starts making a difference, right? The aspect of the rate plus percentage, all that comes into the picture when you actually have these figures and that sort of specification in front of you. Even if I'm talking about just the PCC bed of a foundation, or I'm talking about just the activity of excavation, right? What are the different aspects that go into that actual excavation? Am I looking at physically, manually carried out excavation? Am I looking at hiring machines to do it for me, or equipment to do it for me? Correct? If that is the case, then per cubic meter of that excavation that I'm taking out, what is it going to cost me? And then you try and understand the kind of escalation that would take place with even a difference of a 1 rupee or a 5 rupee in that rate that is mentioned there, along with that specific item. Okay. So like I said, with that every 1 cubic meter, if I'm going to charge 1 rupee more than what Shantanu charges, then for the entire project, I'm probably escalating the cost by, say, 1 crore very easily. Now, try and understand with the help of the scale of the project. Okay. Now, while the tenders are received, they're all in sealed envelopes, they're all closed, nobody knows what is inside there. That earnest money deposit check is, of course, enclosed in within the tender. So there are very different ways again of accepting these tenders. You might have to submit two envelopes. One envelope which has the BOQ, your rates mentioned, or a rate plus percentage, which means rates are already given and you are adding your percentage to it and submitting. You have the earnest money deposit check also, or a DD. I think they take it these days. It's not a check because checks can bounce. So it's mostly in the form of a DD, if I'm not mistaken. Then you also might have another envelope which sort of explains the strengths of your firm. You might be talking about the various projects that you have already carried out, the projects that you are already involved in, and you probably would talk about the strength of your firm in terms of the resources, that is the people you have employed, and what are the kind of other resources you have to your disposal. Okay. So for large projects, for example, you have a technical and a financial proposal which you would put together. Sometimes you're submitting a request for an RFP or an RFQ for projects, which is slightly different from what the tender is. It's a request for proposal and request for qualification, which again has a whole lot of different kind of aspects, different kind of forms that you need to fill, different kinds of formats into which you need to fill all this information and submit. So this is generally taking place in, say, larger firms or JVs with international firms and things like that. So think a little beyond is what I'm trying to say. Think of all these larger projects, especially when you go out to do your internship, you'll encounter all this. So it's not like a very simple BOQ thing that we're talking about. It's also a whole gamut of other kind of documents that need to be attached and submitted. Now, these are sealed documents. You can't open them before a time that is mentioned. If you check the tender notice that Shantanu showed you, there is a time for buying the tender. There is a deadline for it. That tender document is not going to be available beyond that specific time on that specific day. So they probably give you a week to buy it. Tenders cost anywhere from 15,000 to a lakh these days, depending on the scale of the project. You might have to download it because it's available digitally these days. And then, yes, you have to fill all that in and submit. So it's submitted physically in the sealed form, and then it has to be opened in front of some mandatory kind of members, right? The owner is going to be there, the architect is going to be there, some members are going to be there. In the presence of all these people, you need to open the tender. Now, what happens, like Shantanu again rightly mentioned, is that scrutiny of the rates needs to take place, right? It's only then I can't just look at the last figure and say, chalo Shantanu ka 5 crore hai, Mamta ka 5 crore 60,000 hai, so this thing gets awarded to Shantanu. I cannot do that. I need to scrutinize. I need to understand in case there has been a miscalculation anyway. I need to check if some rates are going haywire at certain places. So these are the things so it's not like a very easy process. It's quite complicated. Also, it has to be unbiased. It has to be neutral, and only then you will be able to conclude whom you're going to award that contract to. Okay, so these are certain things which you need to keep in mind. And like I said, what we would like you to do while the debate exercise is going on is maybe try and get us examples of different types of tenders. Once the tenders are signed, they become contracts. Okay, understand that it's not very different from tenders. The tender itself and this document becomes part of the tender contract. There are other documents also that get included, which we'll see later on. But basically, this is the major component of the contract document. So I think it will be nice if you guys explore on your own. If you get for yourselves different kinds of examples. After we do contracts, you can do this exercise of trying to maybe say, for example, see how the C-Link tender was floated. How did that project get awarded? What is the kind of tender that they submitted? How did the contract document get made? Who are the parties who are involved? Did they do a joint venture? Did they do a consortium? What is it that they got into to be able to carry out that project? Okay. Yeah. Any questions? Are you guys there, or you all fell asleep after all these theory classes?
We can move on to their doubts about the debate part of it.
Yeah, okay. Yeah. If you have no questions, then what was it, Parth, that you said that you were unclear about? I don't think anyone is around, only Shantanu.
Okay.
फिर next time debate करेंगे या नहीं करेंगे?
Who told you about? Who asked you out?
Parth only said that they're not clear, which is why we decided to have a lecture today.
Parth is here or not today?
क्या पता?
Hello.
Hello.
Yes, I think he's here.
Yeah. Does anyone want to say anything?
Yeah, I have a doubt. Hello.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I was actually a little confused. So when we say it's like a tender document, it also includes the working drawings as well as the BOQ. So when we present a sale document to like the committee or like the owner, so then the design process is done before. So basically, we do the design process, then we do the tender documents, and then we present it. So we don't have the project in hand. We just give it the design with the tender, and then it gets approved.
No, see, the project is already with you. Okay, you are already assigned as the project management manager or the architect or whatever it is. Okay. The tendering process, where if you look at I don't know, Mamta last time she showed you some so the schedule of works and the schedule of payments and all these things. So if you look at that, okay, the by the time that you reach the working drawing process, you're already paid some 60% of your fees. Okay. After that, you're coming up with all of these tender drawings and all of these things. So yes, the job, so you already kind of gone through the design process. You have already approved the designs. All of these things are done. Okay, the municipal approvals have come. Everything, all of that has already happened. Okay, and then you are kind of going with looking at these kind of processes where you are actually now starting to get people to build the thing for you. Yeah, does that answer your
Okay.
question? Yeah.
Okay, so basically, then there are not multiple people who would offer a tender. There would be just the main architect who would be, and his team who would be offering the tender.
No, that's it. The tender is done on behalf of the client. Okay, it's not like they are the bidder. Okay, there will be multiple people responding to the tender.
Okay,
Okay,
but
see,
I'm getting confused because.
no, I'll tell you. See what happens. Okay. So see this process ना, ये सब जो हम लोग बात कर रहे हैं ना, that comes way. It comes at a much later stage. Design and everything happens much earlier. Okay, ये सब होने के बाद, then you are kind of getting to the stage where you are, kind of, looking for a. See again, it's a question of you getting the best possible person to do the job for you. Okay. So if you unless you know what the job is and you know exactly what kind of people you require, you cannot float a tender. Yeah. So that is basically that is the stage at which this happens. So you are the one, or the architect on behalf of the client is the one who is floating the tender. Okay. And then you would have multiple people responding to the tender. That's what will happen.
Okay, all right, I got it. And also in case of projects which have like stopped, so now because of the pandemic, a lot of projects which have just stopped. So in that case, what happens with the tender? Like, is there any changes, or like how do you deal with that then?
Yeah. So now the pandemic is something that was completely unexpected. Okay. But you do have a certain fail safes. Okay. You always have some amount of contingency plans in, like, for example, it could be, if it's not if it's not a pandemic, could be whatever else. Could be a flood, could be an earthquake, could be whatever. Okay. Now that will actually come when we talk about contracts at that because there is always something called as project insurance. Yeah. So there are different kinds of calamities or problems that might occur, and so if a project is insured, then that particular then those kind of things can be paid for. So just like you said, if a pandemic hai, I'm not entirely sure ki this would have at all been expected by any insurance company or anybody who kind of went into this. But there would obviously be some amount of negotiation happening then between the contractors and the clients and all of these people. Okay. And then they would probably come up with some kind of a solution to their issue, because the contracts can be renegotiated. It's not like they cannot be. It's not like a contract ho gaya to fir end tak, if both parties agree, then they can renegotiate the contract.
Okay,
Mamta?
all right.
Okay.
So actually, Shantanu, it's 4:13. Otherwise, what I could do with in one of the classes is share a tender document, okay?
That's
And we
easier.
can run through it. It's for the redevelopment of societies, okay? Or it's like a PMC thing. The end of the document has this, okay? What is the additional carpet area that this builder is going to offer? What is the monetary compensation that he is going to provide? So these are the figures. So the tender document is a whole lamba thing. right? All these pages and pages. I'll just scroll through. Okay, where in short, 1 minute. So this has these documents. Okay. There's a tender notice, there's an instruction to the tenderers as to क्या बताना चाहिए उस tender में, a tender form which he has to fill, this pre-qualification and technical bid, उसमें the terms are explained, abbreviations are given, schedules A and B, which we'll talk about when we do the contract. You'll know what a schedule A and B is about, what are the conditions of the project, and what are these kind of amenities and specifications that the builder or the developer is going to give you. And then comes the last part, which is the financial bid. So all this is outlined. Okay, tender notice, which society it is for, what is the address, what is the area, setback क्या है, FSI क्या मिलने वाला है, tender document कहाँ से ले सकते हैं, collect कर सकते हैं, कहाँ submit करना है, what is the amount. See, for this the tender is a 5 lakh rupees thing. Okay, you have to pay 5 lakhs for it. Your earnest money is how much, right? All these things are given over here. Everything goes there. It's like very detailed out. It's not like an easy joke. It's quite detailed. So now this is the instructions. How should he go about filling all this? How should he go about submitting it? Who does he have to address it? How many envelopes? All sorts of things. Okay, so it's quite detailed. And maybe one class then we can look and see as to how all this is done. Okay. But basically, yes. So then at the end of it, you fill this. So in our case now, in the one which you guys do as a BOQ and whatever, this will contain the description or the specification of all the items. So this will probably have, like I mentioned, if I'm talking about excavation, then it will have the description which mentions excavation up to so many millimeters depth in this kind of soil by this, blah, all that kind of description, and then what the rate is. So it's the rate, either the rate which you guys, which the tender is going to fill in there, or if it is a rate plus percentage, maybe the rates are specified, you just have to add a percentage over it, or whatever it is. If it's a small project, then you'll have a lump sum amount, but the entire description of what is going to entail is going to come down over there. उसमें सब लिखा होगा कि if it is lump sum, what is going to include, right, from the excavation to the finish. So the finishes will be mentioned, the plaster finish, the paint, what kind of paint, everything will be mentioned in that document. Okay, the only difference over there is in the lump sum, because you don't know about the stages of payment. Since you're going to do it in one shot, there is a possibility that you might want to add clauses कि इतना काम होने के बाद उस contractor को इतना payment करेंगे, something like that. Okay, which you can sort of design as per your preferences. Yeah. Did that answer your question? Whose question was it?
Yes, I got it.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Any other questions? So what is it about the debate now that you guys were confused about?
Yeah, so sorry, is my voice echoing? The topics that we have to choose, is it us who will decide the topics, or are you going to suggest any?
क्या करेंगे शांतनु? SRA तो suggest किया था. उसके बाद maybe you can bring out some topics. Where do you feel from whatever you've experienced so far, read so far, as to where is this aspect of ethics coming into the profession? So maybe based on that you can suggest, Shantanu and I can think of some, but it's better that we do it before next class so that the rest of the groups can prepare for it.
Yeah, for the same reason.
Exactly.
See, I think we have the SRA project, the SRA wala thing is good. We can start off with that. All right. I think the first group of 20 should be able to begin with this.
Yeah.
And so the first two teams can begin with this, and then we can add on more as we go ahead.
So I think you guys suggest something, Madhura. Maybe it'll be nice if the class can come up with something.
All right. Okay.
Okay.
We're left choosing 3 topics. Right?
Yes, yes, 3 more topics.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Take it.
In fact, it would be good if we kind of follow the standard debate kind of format, wherein there is a vote that takes place before a debate begins. Okay, and you have a proposition and an opposition team, and you have the rest of the people who also vote on the proposition. Yeah, and what happens is you take another debate at the end. Sorry, another vote at the end of a debate, and whichever team has been able to change the most people's minds, that team basically wins. That's no, we are not talking about winners or anything like that here, but I think it would be a good way to kind of incorporate the rest of the people in the process as well. So if the first 20 are going to debate, the remaining I'm guessing 60 will should be kind of voting on the proposition, or like for or against. And then we can see if at the end of the day whether the voting remains the same, or have they been able to change people's minds or what. Yeah, can we do that?
Yeah, sure, we can do that. But how many are going to speak? Like, do you, in one team, you're going to have 2 speakers each or 3 speakers each?
I think we can have three. We can have like a opening rebuttal, and we can have a
Huh. Okay.
so that should be fine, good enough. And the remaining
Yeah.
so you can have like 3 people. You can choose, the team can choose 3 people to speak, and the remaining 7, okay, they can contribute by through research.
Correct.
So if at all they're not comfortable speaking, or
Yeah.
maybe we can have like maybe we can have one open this thing where if you have questions, or at the end of the day, then the whole team anybody can respond, and that way.
Right, correct. ठीक है.
Okay.